Hi, I'm Joe Firestone, and this is Progressive Short Takes. Welcome to another Progressive Short Take. Well, Trump is losing his base, and this is not simply my contention, but it's the contention of Stanley Greenberg, a well-known pollster, someone who's been polling and talking to people and running focus groups for a very long time. And I'm going to document this by going over an article that Stan Greenberg did in the American Prospect in fairly early September 8th, 2020. So I'm going to share that article with you now. Here we are. You should be seeing it now. I think you are. Let's go over it together, and I'll provide commentary as we go. This is by Stanley B. Greenberg, September 8th of 2020. There's a nice picture of, I guess, what used to be Salmon Ellens. This is the one-time coal boom town of Gloucester, Ohio. Picture of Gloucester. Stan talks about a healthcare crisis that's ravaging the working class in rural communities and how it's threatening to cut off Donald Trump's political career. And Stan thinks that it demands a forceful response from opposition but Democrats. And he says it, quote, "It will teach big lessons about how to reach working people who are struggling, regardless of color." And he cites his experience in using Zoom to listen to white working class voters in Zoom focus groups for the American Federation of Teachers and Voter Participation Center in the first week of August. There's no reason to think anything has changed about this since then, because, of course, we haven't had any increase in healthcare protections for people at all, and the economic situation of most people has gotten a lot worse since then, since the original COVID relief bills are no longer factors in the economy of the United States. Anyway, he did these studies in the first week of August outside of metropolitan areas in rural Wisconsin, the Mahoning Valley region in Ohio, also known as Steel Valley, northern Maine, and suburban Macomb County in Michigan. And the results of the sessions fit in with the results of a telephone survey that was conducted of working class voters in 16 battleground states after Joe Biden selected Kamala Harris for vice president, and just after the launch of the Democratic National Convention, though before his final night acceptance speech. In 2016, a white working class revolt enabled Trump to win men by an unimaginable 48 points and women by 27 points. However, disillusionment was real in the midterms. The Republican House margin dropped 13 points across the white working class. In a new poll, Trump lost a further 6 points with white working class women, where Biden only trailed Trump by 8 points, 52 to 44. While Trump has been throwing a lot of red meat to his base, White working class men have not been dislodged from their trajectory as the margin for Trump eroded another 4 points. So these are mostly low-wage families. There are many with children raised by a single parent. The opioid crisis is very big with them. Deaths are rising. And as are disabilities. And there is also a deadly expensive healthcare system. That was a big part of why they voted for Donald Trump in 2016, so he could end Obamacare and its costly mandate. At least he ended the mandate, and so that he would be able to deliver affordable health insurance for all. When he failed to do so, many voted against the Republicans in the midterms because Trump hardly ever delivers for his people, at least for working class people who support him. Stanley Greenberg goes on, but the pandemic was the perfect storm. He says, I have never seen such a poignant discussion of the health and disability problems facing families and their children, the risks they faced at work, and the prospect of even higher health care and prescription drug costs. The final straw was a president who battled not for the forgotten Americans, but for himself, the top 1%, and the biggest and greatest companies. That's why most in the Zoom focus groups pulled back from President Trump. 3/4 of these voters supported Trump in 2016, but less than half plan to vote for him now. And the polls since have borne that out. He has taken very great losses within these groups. Even those who still supported him did not push back when other participants expressed anger with his doing nothing about health care, fostering hatred and racism, dividing the country, siding with the upper classes, and having no plan for COVID-19. This is a life and death issue for them as much as nearly any other group in American society. Of course, this group was still very cautious about Joe Biden, who seemed old and not very strong, but most importantly offered the prospect of only minor changes to the healthcare system. It seemed unlikely to challenge the power of the top 1%. Now, that is the situation that continues right now, except that Biden, after the last couple of months during the campaign, since August, may be seeming not quite as old and a lot stronger. Certainly, right now, there seems not much difference between the strength of Joe Biden and the strength, of Donald Trump, especially since Donald Trump has gotten COVID now. Now, of course, he's trying to come back very strong, and he's traveling all over, and he's seeming as as robust, as ever. But certainly, his mental state has not seemed to be very stable. He seems much more depressed than he used to be, much more angry than he used to be. Biden, on the other hand, seems to be becoming increasingly confident as time has gone by. And at least to me, and maybe to other people who are looking too, he must right now be seeming to be stronger and at least as energetic as Donald Trump, who, rather than seeming energetic in a positive way, must be seeming instead pretty frantic. As for minor changes in the healthcare system, I'm afraid Biden still has that particular problem. He still is promising only a public option, and he hasn't really made the case that the public option is going to improve the lot, of working people, and especially improve their economic condition. He keeps talking about Obamacare and improving Obamacare, but Obamacare, among these voters at least, is not very popular. Anyway, Stanley Grunberg goes on, like lots of other working people, they're looking for a leader who will make big changes in healthcare, fight for working people over big business, and unite the country to defeat the current economic and healthcare crisis. And Stanley goes ahead and talks more about working class anger with the establishment after the financial crisis of 2008, and how they have failed to rally fully for Democratic candidates until the midterms of 2018, when Democrats ran on healthcare, healthcare, healthcare. They're not running on healthcare, healthcare, healthcare right now. They're running on no Trump, no Trump, no Trump right now, which is, of course, fairly popular because people are sick to death of Trump. But think how much more effective the campaign would have been if they were not only running on no Trump, no Trump, no Trump, no Trump, but also healthcare, 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 specifically single payer healthcare with no copays and with no deductibles right in the middle of the pandemic. I have a feeling Biden would have another 10 points. Anyway, some personal stories. My wife is disabled, said one man from Wisconsin. My daughter has a 30% immune system left, so she's bouncing around from doctor to doctor. And the wife says, don't bring the pandemic home, unquote. Another Wisconsin man spoke of his terminally ill 7-year-old son. A woman in Maine explained how she nearly bled to death and had a $24,000 medical bill on my credit report for who knows how long. One woman from Ohio had 2 kids with autism, and another had a grandson with allergies requiring access to a life-saving EpiPen. Quote, I haven't been able to get him one for the last 3 years. I can't afford it. My insurance won't cover it, the woman said. Prices have skyrocketed for EpiPens and remain stubbornly high. As I was observing the Zoom group, says Stan, I initially wondered whether the focus group recruiter had used some specialized list to find the participants. But then I checked the census data on disabilities. Across the country, 12.6% of the population has disabilities, rising to 15.1% in the rural areas. Black and Native American populations are more likely to have disabilities than their white counterparts. The rate is over a quarter for those 65 to 74 years old, and half of those over 75 years. All groups that are overrepresented in rural areas. And structural racism has played a powerful role here. 20% of blacks with disabilities were employed at the beginning of this year, compared to 30% of whites and Hispanics with disabilities. He says, then I looked at census data for the congressional districts where these sessions were being held. It was a new window into America in the pandemic. In suburban Macomb County, that's the key county in Michigan, the disability rate looks like the rural areas. It's a suburb, of course, with 14% of both whites and blacks disabled. In northern Maine, the numbers show 1 in 5 with disabilities, slightly more for whites. In Ohio's 6th congressional district, both 1 in 5 whites and blacks are disabled. And seniors in these areas are even more disabled than other rural Americans. So COVID violently brought together the personal health crises of these people and the failed and corrupted government response, breaking their emotional bond with Trump. And the article goes on and on, okay, in this particular vein. There was one woman in Michigan who said, quote, the way we deliver healthcare is just unbelievable. The amount of waste and how much it costs to let people go bankrupt to pay for medical bills, unquote. This is all screaming for Medicare for all, of course. Biden stubbornly resists it, said one Ohio woman. You're just a number now. They fight for every dime as they're being overwhelmed by a healthcare crisis they recognize Donald Trump has failed to fix. And importantly, for working families outside poverty, the healthcare reforms passed by the Democrats, the Affordable Care Act, and insurance on the healthcare exchanges just were not much help. Discussion of the Affordable Care Act did not sound ideological, said Stan, as they talked about their direct experience with insurance on the exchanges, which, in the words of one woman, quote, costs a lot of money and doesn't pay for much of anything, unquote. Healthcare system is failing them, and they want someone to fix it. Joe Biden's rhetoric has not been very reassuring that he would make big changes. He's been vague on healthcare, one woman from Wisconsin said. I want to know the specifics of what he'll do to make it better. Of course, Biden hasn't been doing much to give us the specifics to make it better, has he? But as for Trump, their response to him now is now profoundly shaped to what has happened in COVID-19. They think he failed to take the virus seriously and has just made a mess of it. What was striking is how the usual Trump deflect and blame strategy no longer works with these swing voters. Quote, it seems like a lot of the stuff he's saying could be proven wrong, said one man from Wisconsin. He just won't admit where things are. He's out of touch with reality, said another woman. It's just embarrassing to have a country with the highest COVID cases, highest COVID deaths, said a man in Michigan. Quote again, we're supposed to be the leader in the world and we completely fumbled the ball on this. They all know that there's a lack of a national plan of action with everyone simply left on their own. One woman said he didn't shut down domestic travel because he owns hotels, quote unquote. And the participants were paying a lot of attention to the position of Trump's family in the administration and how the bailouts and loans are benefiting his family business, his cronies, and the top 1%. At the same time, they're on a financial edge. They're very angry. Very angry. The article continues more in this vein. Quote, and speaking of Trump, you lied to the American people about COVID. Everything is wrong with America. You have effectively ruined this country. Congrats. You suck. Unquote. It is critical to listen for what they did not say. Quote, what an ass I was to vote for the guy in the last election. They did not regret or say they made a mistake. All working Americans have been in financial trouble since the 2008 crash and rising healthcare problems, disabilities, healthcare costs, and deductibles, and empowered insurance in pharmaceutical companies were an explosive brew. It's why many people voted for Trump in 2016. And COVID has shattered so many lies, but also seemingly insurmountable political barriers. The great majority of working people, regardless of color, are desperate for a government that stops taking direction from the pharmaceutical companies and brings the boldest feasible changes to our healthcare system. Well, of course, they're still not hearing boldness from Joe Biden, but we have to say, okay, we have to admit that Trump is only digging a worse hole for himself. He keeps repeating the lies he's been telling, including in the latest of debates. And meanwhile, COVID is mushrooming again in the country, with the headlines full of the fact that we've had the second highest weekly total of new cases, some 77,000. And of course, people are keeping track of the fatalities. They know we've lost 225,000 people, and according to the Worldometer site, it's more like 228,686 people, and looking at 689 people per million for the United States. By the way, today there was a report that I'll cover in the in-depth show tomorrow night that was released actually on October 21st by Columbia University, and it provides people with a cross-national perspective on how the United States has done in managing COVID. It has a similar perspective to the one I've been giving in my in-depth shows, but this comes from Columbia University and a research center there with a nice colorful table showing the differences, okay, among the various nations and driving home the lesson that, comparatively speaking, cross-nationally, we have done a terrible job. So I wanted to convey that and to draw the conclusion also that as we approach the election and as the COVID situation gets worse day by day here in the United States, which it is doing, the healthcare crisis and the economic crisis will be brought home again to these people in the Midwest, in the Rust Belt, in the key states that Trump must win: Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Well, Minnesota is not so important to him, but Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin are clearly very important. And Ohio also clearly important. And these are the areas in which people are really starting to suffer now from this virus and really starting to feel the pressure of what happens if I come down with this and I have the COVID expenses. What's going to happen to me then? There's no relief in sight. There's still no stimulus bill to relieve the pressure on Trump. Day by day, it's getting worse and worse as we approach the election. Don't look for tightening up in this election. As we approach this election now, look for the gap to widen again. It most probably is going to do that. So I'm going to leave it there for this progressive short take. I'll be back with another one fairly soon.